I'm here as Harald Alvestrand, chair of the IETF. And to make that point very clear, so Cisco happens to be perfectly happy with paying my bills, strangely, but in this particular instance I am speaking on behalf of and about the IETF. So what was the button that worked here?
You can connect to your laptop.
We can take the other alternative.
You don't need network.
It starts working exactly when we're ready to ship it, just like a lot of other bags. So let's talk about what is this internet thing anyway? Because the IETF is about the internet. And in order to understand what the internet is, or what the IETF is, we've got to have a common understanding of the internet. I'd like to talk about a lot of things, a lot of which I have skipped here, like the history, structures and procedures and who is who in the IETF. I'm going to speak a little about relations to other standards bodies, because the IETF knows that it doesn't do everything. What a novel idea. So an organization that doesn't think it should control the world. And a little bit about where the internet is going and what we hope it will look like when it gets there. So, what is this internet anyway? Well, most of you have this idea that, okay, you take the computer and you run a wire from it and you connect to the internet. So the internet is something that runs around in your building. Well, yes, but it's got to connect somewhere. There's a big cloud in the middle, which is the internet as the backbone, usually using optical fiber, usually pushing on gigabit speeds. But there isn't one of them. There are several connected together, which means there's no single network you can point to and say, that's the internet. There are lots of things that are part of the internet. And this internet connects into various places using various technologies. Call these technologies access networks. And basically anything that can pass bits has been turned into parts of the internet, including carrier pigeons. RFC 1149 was implemented this May by a group of people in Bergen. That's IP over carrier pigeon. Just to have mentioned that. In more novel pieces of the internet with a little more economic significance, we got things like handsets, like IP telephones, like connecting to airplanes and satellites. If it's got a need to communicate, people are wanting to connect it to the internet. So the internet is kind of about communication. It's big and it's all over the place. The IETF is the organization charged with making standards for the internet. Historical developer of internet-related protocols. The place where you go when you want to make standards and you want to have them work well on the internet. The internet and the IETF kind of grew up together. The first IETF meeting, we recently had the 50th one. The first one was small enough to fit around a single table. The last one had almost 2,000 people. And that was after the stock market did its dance. It's a consortium or an organization composed of individual people. That's very important to remember. The IETF is an organization of people, not organizations. So when I go to the IETF, as I've been doing for the last 10 years, almost, I go as Harald Alvestram, who happens to be employed by Cisco. I do not go, and have never gone, as the representative of the organization. It's people. And its fundamental working principle is this: we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. If it does not work, don't bring it to the IETF. If we can't at least get most people to agree that it's the right thing, it's hard to bring it out of the IETF. But no matter what, we will never pass something out as Internet standard with a 51% majority. Now, the American election would have taken a little longer under those rules, I believe. So you also note from the first bullet that if I, as chair of the IETF, tell the IETF that you must do something because I declare it to be so, then I can expect to have a change in position rather rapidly. Leaders in the IETF are facilitators, not managers. We don't control. We help people do what is needed to be done. And we need a rough consensus on what needs to be done. So why people come here? Why people work together? Because there is no one organization or company that has a corner on intelligence or expertise. Or put in other terms, most good people don't work for Cisco. If this had been a Cisco meeting, I would probably say, yet. But it's likely to stay that way. And all parties have a common interest in making the Internet work. Because being a big fish in a big pond, being a little fish in a big pond is usually means being a bigger fish than a big fish in a little pond. If you make the Internet work better, it's more useful to people, and therefore the Internet grows bigger. And that's good for all of us. Also for the users, they got a more useful Internet. You are users, remember. Okay, but the IETF doesn't do everything. So exactly what does it do? Well, I put on my layered T-shirt today, which is one of the, for those who are so far away you can't see it, it's the multi-level model of the networking stack with physical link, network, transport, session, presentation, application, financial, and political. You see where you are here buttons. But anyway, looking at the layered model, you can see, start out by looking at what the IETF does not do. We don't do HTML. The World Wide Web Consortium does that. We don't do Ethernet or 802.11 because the IEEE is doing a fine job of handling that. We don't do the cellular things that ETSI thinks that it can manage to make work. Don't do GFM. And we don't do ATM or frame relay or all the stuff that sits below, like optical fibers and various shapes and contortions, because the ITUT is perfectly capable of standardizing that on its own. But as for the rest of it, yes, the ITF does that. I see it roughly as the ITF is about making the internet work. So if we need to make a standard to make the internet work, then the ITF needs to do it, if nobody else is up to the task. There are some tasks that are a little bit off to the side, which are things that we're not quite sure whether they're part of the internet or just part. Like MPLS, like telephony signaling. When I had a document cross my virtual desktop, which means my laptop, today, which was about how to signal what kind of ringtone you should present to the user when doing telephony over the internet. Now the ITF has got zero competence in what tone a user should hear in his handset. But this is part of what's termed a joint effort with the ITU, no less, which actually claims to have some competence in what tones the user expects to hear when he picks up the handset and does things to it. So these are cooperative agreements. Some parties do something, some parties don't. And we're publishing joint documents, which is why this document lands on my desk. Most of the time they don't like that. Either you do it or I do it, but the stuff that's in the middle tends to be messy. Oh well. MPLS is a different case, because it's got this MPLS forum which says that MPLS is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we should all have more of it. Well, seeing that sliced bread has somehow not quite caught up in Europe, you might wonder about MPLS too. But anyway, when MPLS is used to carry IP traffic, it's kind of relevant to the internet too. The things that the internet are used for and used over come from all over the place. And the ITF provides standards for network infrastructure on top of the interfaces other people have defined. But the basic function of the ITF is to make the internet work. There was supposed to be something on that slide, I think. But I can't remember what it was supposed to say. No, it doesn't even have a Cisco logo. Come on, everybody. Oh, that was an interesting slide. Okay, let's try this one instead. Now, I remember what was supposed to be on that slide. Because, when I'm talking about internet, that's a word in the singular. We don't want multiple internets. We want exactly one. And a lot of the things that we are doing now are intended to keep the internet as one internet, where you can connect from any place on that internet to any other place on that internet and communicate with no prior arrangements and without having to negotiate or conform to profiles, as long as you're allowed to. We also want you to communicate securely, which means that you should be allowed to, and all that, but we need one and only one internet. Now, this idea is not particularly global. This idea is not particularly the thing a lot of people want to hear, because a lot of people like the business model that says, okay, you are my user, you pay me money, I control what you see. You will continue to pay me money because you have no alternative. This is called a walled garden approach sometimes. Other times it's called AOL. But one of the things that has continued to astound me is the continuing success of AOL and MSN and Yahoo and all the other things that want to manage your internet experience. Because I think that the internet is most useful when there's nobody managing it for you. But anyway, back to our currently featured slide. We need to have a single IP protocol, except that we don't have it, because IPv4 has served us grandly for so many years, but it's not holding up to the tasks. Especially it's not holding up to the task of making sure any device that's authorized to do so can connect to any other, because it simply has less addresses than we want to connect devices to the internet. So we need something new. IPv6. You heard about that. No? This is actually easy. So V6 is being deployed at last, and we've got a wide selection of ways you can make V6 and V4 work together. We've also got a wide range of opinions on which one is best, and precious little data on which one is actually best. Most of the stuff is fairly worked out. We're having some trouble at the moment in the DNS space, where we somehow ended up with, or we somehow now are at a place in at least two different points of the DNS stuff, that where we have one thing that many people think are good and another thing that a lot of people think are better, and we're not sure whether they're the right thing. But the right thing to do now is to go build V6 networks. There's something seriously broken there. The other interesting area of architecture we have on the drawing boards at the moment is what some people refer to as layer 2.5. You know, the stuff that kind of, it's not IP because it's what IP runs over. It's L2TP, MPLS, ATM, ATM over IP, IP over ATM, ATM over IP over ATM, frame relay over ATM over IP over ATM. People have found a surprising number of these protocols stacked inside other protocols and twisted outside other protocols and managed around other protocols useful, and are building services on them. So, but after a while it kind of looks like trying to sort a plate of spaghetti. So the ITF in its infinite wisdom and through a lot of quarreling has decided to create an area where this is the main problem, so it won't be distracted by other things. So we created the sub-IP temporary area. The temporary means that we hope that after having quarreled for a year or so, we'll all agree and we can shut down the area and go back to our regular scheduled program. Well, we've hoped. But anyway, the drawing here is kind of intended to, if this thing, point out that we have this weird idea that we have some kind of common idea of what something layered on top of something else in support of the internet looks like. So, okay, if we have a weird idea that there's a commonality of what it looks like, we can define things to control and measure that model of how things are. So we have this thing called CCAMP, Common Control and Measurement Plane. Plane is another one of those words that we should pay a lot because we make it do a lot of work. Anyway, so the point being that if you have got technology that moves things across wires, like MPLS, IP over optical, ATM, frame relay, blah 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 blah, then you should enable that as something that can be controlled via the common control and measurement plane. And if you want to do traffic engineering or provision virtual private networks or other interesting stuff that needs to control these things, you could be able to use common technologies to do that. So that you wouldn't have one kind of traffic engineering for MPLS and another for ATM and a third one for frame relay and a fourth one for IP over optical. That would be confusing, wouldn't it? Well, it's the way the world is now, and I find it confusing, so proof by existence. This is a weird way to change slides. Anyway, the sub-ID temporary area at the moment has 7 working groups. The area directors doing this are Scott Badman and Bert Weinen, who are also doing respectively transport and management. And are trying to sort out what the current tasks are. If you look at the Internet drafts listing, there are 200 drafts that contain the letters MPLS in the names. It's obvious that not all of these drafts describes technology that is critical to the future of the Internet, but it's likely that some might. So Scott and Bert have a sorting job to do. We have a long discussion of what's in scope and out of scope on this one. And the only thing we figured that we're sure about is not in scope is running MPLS over MPLS in order to carry services that are not IP. I mean, if it doesn't touch IP anywhere, it's not the IETF's problem. But since a lot of things touch IP somewhere, a lot of things tend to be the IETF's problem. Okay, but there are other problems. One thing we don't have a shortage of is problems. And one of the challenges to keeping the internet single, one internet for all, is to keep the routing working. This plot here is one that Jeff Houston has been running around the world with for the last 6 months and scaring people with. You can see the effect of scaring people right up there. Well, it didn't help very much, but the number of routes, the number of pieces of information that is needed in order to make correct routing decisions in the current internet is on the order of 100,000. That's a lot. And the reason it's a lot is not that 100,000 is a big number, but whenever you change one of these 100,000 things, all the computers inside all the routers participating in this have to stop and think for a while, recompute the routing tables, and tell everyone else what they decided. And if that decision was something has changed, all the other routers that care about this change have to stop for a while, recompute the routing tables, and decide what they want to do about it. This is called instability. The Internet routing architecture has a limit to how much instability it can tolerate. And the more of these objects we have in that database, the longer it takes to do the thinking, and the more instability we expect. The interesting thing about this curve is not just the sheer size of it, although 100,000 is a nice round number, but the shape. It's going upwards, which means that it's growing faster. Luckily, this process has a natural upper limit. When you connect more devices than can fit into the IPv4 routing table, and can fit into the IPv4 addressing architecture to the internet than the IPv4 addressing architecture can handle, this problem would stop. So as long as all routers can route on a flat 32-bit address, a different route for every address in the world, there's a limit to the problem. But it's like saying, okay, the population expansion problem will stop when there's no more room to move. Well, not a practical solution. So we need a rethink of the way the routing system works. We probably need some emergency patches so that we can survive the next couple of years while we do the rethink, but the way we actually do, wow, it worked. the way we actually do this routing thing is going to change, and that's going to be painful. But we got more sources of instability, more challenges. The domain name system is sharply limited, not in what you can put into it, but in what names perform a useful function when you get them out again. So people who, like my son, have strange wiggles and circles and dots and scurries in the names, think that I should be allowed to have my own domain too. I should be able to put names that I like into identifiers. Well, I can't kind of see the point of that. Why should the Americans have all the good domains? Just because they happen to live inside a silly alphabet? But it's painful, because these things that we are writing down in the ASCII alphabet, A to Z, plus dash and numbers, are not names, and were never intended to be names. They are identifiers, identifying objects, identifying machines, identifying pages. But we are using them as if they were names. The easy part is actually getting characters into the DNS, because the DNS is that binary transparent protocol. The DNS protocol doesn't care what shit you feed into it. But it turns out that having a name and putting it inside an application protocol where the applications are all written to expect a very limited set of characters is a recipe for disasters. We also have the slight problem that one of the participants in the standards process has decided that they own a patent on the technology that most of the working group would like to see used for this, and they're not willing to give it away. So there are problems with getting to a solution. The most probable solution looks like what's down here. We will see names that look like some kind of disaster happened to the keyboard. Cat walked over it or something. And you will run software that will magically discover that this part of the screen is supposed to contain the domain name, and it contains one of these train wrecks. Let's see if we can pass that as an internationalized domain name, and you will end up with something that looks a little bit like the stuff I stole from idns.net. We hope. The real solution, if there is such a thing, is probably trying to disentangle identifiers from names. Because we need to use names and real names. No, not real names, trademark. Real names. Real names is a trademark term. So that we can wave some magic thing at our computers and say, give me the web page for the commercial I saw on the side of the bus yesterday. It contained a picture of a nice lady with a toothbrush in her hand and the word Solidox on top of it. And the result should, of course, be the right thing. But we don't know how to do that yet. Okay. That's the current interesting things, like the top 3 disasters that are trying to get solved in the ITF. So remember again, a good slogan for the ITF is One Internet. Because the opportunities of having one internet are much larger than trying to create new networks and other networks and non-interconnected networks and walled gardens. The challenges are frankly enormous. We need help. And we try for some. do internationalization, IPv6, trying to get a handle on the routing problem, and so forth. But the network belongs to us. Some people claim the internet belongs to nobody. I claim the internet belongs to us. Questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Harald, for this nice and very interesting presentation. I would suggest to limit a couple of questions now, then I want to give the floor to Marwan, and then if we will have more time at the end, of course we could go ahead until 5:30, which is our end time. So, someone want to ask a question now? Chief?
What do you see as the main topics the IRTF could contribute more than they already do?
Once more, what could you see as the main topics the IRTF could contribute to, apart from what they are already doing?
The way the IETF and the IRTF works are a bit different. Research, the R part of the IRTF, means that you should be able to attack a problem not knowing whether there is a solution or not. In the IETF, most useful effort comes when we know that a problem can be solved, but in order to achieve maximum value of it, we have to solve it together. So we can go fight for a month or a year and get the best possible solution given the restraints on the problem. But if we got generally new things that we really don't know how to do, I think that very often is something that needs to be looked at in a wider context, where the IRTF is kind of our attempt to build an institutionalized way to set that up. At the moment, the naming and directory-like or internationalization-like thing is about the most obvious thing that needs something different from normal IETF process. I'm not sure whether that's the only thing, but there are probably many things. If you don't know the answer and it's urgent and needs to be looked at, the IRTF is one possible way of doing it.
Well, obviously, yesterday in my presentation I made a few suggestions like middleware kind of things, optical in the 2, 5 and 10 year time frame from now. We have abundances of lambdas. The other probably hot question is what should be the relationship and the boundaries, or should there be boundaries between grid form and IETF?
We had a discussion about this in and around Minneapolis, and the Grid Forum is actually an easy organization to have a relationship to, because it's got an open process, it's able and willing to have its documents published so that anyone in the world can see them. I mean, for some organizations that's quite a novel concept, and it's willing to participate in the IETF. So what we more or less agreed on at that time was that the Grid Forum could at any time ask to use the informational RFC mechanism to publish things like anyone else, and that when the Grid Forum wanted to have a standards thing done, it could easily participate in the IETF process and from the normal consensus process of making standards. And in fact, we didn't need anything more than that. So we can talk to you, you can talk to us, We can all agree on what's the right thing to do, and I hope that's all. The ITF is really lousy at doing formal liaisons, so we prefer not to if we can avoid it.
Okay, thank you. Another question? Michael?
Without the microphone. In case I don't already know the answer, could I get your opinion on the activities of some significant industry groups in setting up their own DNS root servers independently of the existing DNS system?
In the interest of not bothering this group with too much logo invective, I suggest that participants read the IAB statement of the need for a unique DNS root. To put it this way, the DNS was designed to manage a single namespace. I attribute a very large proportion of the success of the Internet to having and using that single namespace or identifier space, to go a few slides back, intelligently and once. I regard the idea of selling a service with names that cannot be looked up by anyone in the Internet without prior arrangement. I regard selling that service as the same service as the DNS service, as not truth in advertising. They are in fact selling a different service that does a different thing, which might be a legitimate thing to do, but they should not sell it as the Internet naming service, the DNS. I'll leave stronger verbiage to other participants.
Okay. Does the next presentation is ready or not?
I can start.
Okay, so I suggest now we give the floor to Marwan, and we thank again Harald and Marwan Tarazi from Bill Zayed University, Palestine, will give his presentation.
Thank you. Ready?
So, as I said in the beginning, this session was scheduled for for Thursday morning, and for some problem of flights to go back to Palestine, Marwan has to go back tomorrow. And I think that being here in the Eastern Mediterranean, it is quite important to listen to an opinion of someone living in a university community in an eastern country of Mediterranean, to tell us about the opportunities and obstacles for the cooperation with the European countries. And ready?
Just about.
Okay.
There is no mixture.
It's okay. I think this talk is going to be quite different from the previous one. We're going to be looking at a different topic change of mode altogether. I think this one will address more the social aspects of research networks, very untechnical. I will go very quickly. I would like to highlight IT and globalization. For somebody coming from a developing country, IT is becoming it's an important issue. There are so many advances happening in IT these days that and we're pushed into globalization that IT is not becoming, IT is no longer a luxury item. It's becoming a necessity. We have to move into IT. And we are facing something now that's called information poverty, and something that you face at every level of the society. If you don't have good information poverty impairs public and private decision-making, policy-making, planning without facts. These are problems that will make things more difficult for developing countries. Also, you can see there's low productivity, poor quality research, valuable time wasted hunting for already existing information and work that has already been done. So what is happening now is we're getting into a widening of the gap. We know there's a gap between developed and developing countries, but due to the information gap, this gap is becoming bigger. We're increasing the gap between the rich and the poor, the countries and those who have and have not. So those who are better at information, those who have better access to information fare better, and the gap between those countries is growing bigger. It's becoming more difficult to bridge and develop. So what we're seeing now is this point, I think, is very important here to point out, and the point is that IT is very important for poverty alleviation. This is an issue that is important for developing countries to look at. We see that the poor are the largest human resource in developing countries. We also know that human resources are amongst the few resources in the Middle Eastern countries possess. This applies to all developing countries, by the way. It's not only the Middle East. I mean, poor people constitute the majority of the resources, or the majority of the people in developing countries. A very interesting point that one doesn't think about too often is that IT services are very labor intensive, whether it's programming, whether it's graphic design, whether it's doing menial work, IC chips, soldering. It's very labor intensive. So fun things about it, I mean, by getting IT industries, they can absorb a lot of people into IT, and that's important for poverty alleviation. To us also, we feel strongly IT and the political situation. Again, the information poverty and information gap is something that we're suffering a lot from. I mean, we feel that the situation we're going through a major injustice. We feel, at least as Palestinians and Arabs in general, and that a lot has to do with the fact that people do not know the facts, do not know what really is going on with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the Arab conflict in general. So this is one of the problems that is due to lack of information. So now we see that information technology is a must. It's no longer, previously information technology was thought of as a luxury. Initially, people were thinking, it's nice if you do well, you have IT, you have information, it becomes a luxury. But all of a sudden now, people are realizing that IT is a tool for development and for bridging the development gap, and it also is an industry for growth, development, and poverty alleviation. So it's no longer nice to have IT, it's no longer good to develop IT and get into IT, but it's something that we really need to get into. Before talking about technology, and when we talk about technology and the potential for developing technology, it's important. I would like to raise, IT. I'd like to talk about the technology, the status of technology in the Arab world. We have a problem. First, we have a poor knowledge infrastructure. That's a major problem. There's no adequate libraries. There's poor access to international knowledge. No access to local knowledge generated within the Arab world or within each country. And there's weak educational systems. So this is a knowledge infrastructure that is weak. It's a problem. Another problem, science, technology, and innovation in the Arab world. It's another major problem. We see there's a lot of import of ready technologies. Very little is being developed locally. There's a serious problem is no culture of transfer of knowledge. Arab countries spend a lot of money on obtaining technology and knowledge, and we've been doing that since 200 years ago. 200 years ago, the first
the first contract to build the first Egyptian railway was granted to George Stephens at the time, and then ever since Arabs have been importing cars and trains and new technologies, but all along nothing has developed. We failed to develop the technology base for these and other mechanical industries. There are no other mechanical industries in the Arab world. That's a serious problem. It's a problem that we need to address, we need to look at now. And now we see in 1999 September, Bill Gates came and donated a whole bunch of MS Suite and products for the Jordanian government. Now, unless the Jordanians or the Arabs come back and try to do something about the suite and try to start getting involved in the development of the technology or using the technology in developing, we're going back to the same trend that was started 200 years ago. It's a problem. It's something that again we need to look into. Fragmented, that's another problem. The Arab world has close to 300 million. I'd like to make in this slide and the coming slide, I'd like to make some comparisons with India. I think you'll find, I thought it was interesting, probably you'll find it interesting. The Arab world has close to 300 million people. India has 1.2 billion, we're talking about 4 times the population. Per capita, I bet you nobody ever thought about that. Per capita income from IT industries in Jordan or somewhere in the Arab world is equal to that of India. That's interesting to think about. Likewise, per capita scientific publications in the Arab world are more than those of India. But yet, we know that IT in Jordan, IT is extremely small in Jordan. It's very developed. It's very, very basic. Or scientific publications in the Arab world are very basic, very, very small. And the reason for this is that India, and the previous slide I said fragmented, India works as one unit, one big unit, as one country. And it has major centers for creative work. That's very important. It also has pockets of high quality science and technology where they do research, where they do publications, where they do work. This is also extremely important. And India as one entity also has a very large market and is attractive to anyone. All the IT industries, the companies, the HPs, the Microsofts, the Oracles, they're interested in going there. Now we know, on the one hand, they're interested to go there because India has a lot of human resources that can do development, but there's also interested because it's a big market. Now when we look at the Arab world, going from Jordan 3 million to Syria 6 million to Lebanon 3-4 million to etc. Everywhere you have to go, you're going into different countries with borders and boundaries and trade restrictions and all that makes the Arab world very small, fragmented places where very little in terms of development can happen because they lose a lot of these attributes that, given the Indian example, is significant. India is quite developed in IT, in sciences and research and development, even though, as I said, per capita you would notice that it's equal to Jordan. Research and development is another catastrophe. We know now globally that production and ownership of knowledge is becoming a serious business. If we look now at patents, especially if you look at an example of genetic engineering or whatever the pharmaceutical industry, somebody who comes with some sort of invention, somebody sitting on top of a mountain of knowledge and invents something somewhere up here, she or he can have control to a lot of the information underneath. They can have rights for all the information. It's right, nobody can use this information without paying for it. It's becoming a serious business. And companies are spending a lot of money, as we see here, on research and development and developing new ideas. They're not willing just to give it out for the sake of science and for the sake of research. A lot of them are just grabbing into this information and selling it out for anybody who wants it. This is there's a lot of resistance to these ideas, but this is serious. This is a problem. Worldwide, in 1999, there was over $500 billion that were spent on research. Let me give an example. The top 300 companies spent $253 billion, and these companies spent 33% in 1999 more than what they had spent in 1996. And they didn't do that for the love of science or technology. They did that because they realized that they need to do this in order to survive and compete. Now let's look at the situation in the Arab world. Unfortunately, there's widespread disregard of scientific research by Arab governments and industries. Let's look at the example. Another unfortunate example, I say. There are leading 30 firms in chemical industries in the world spend about $16 billion on research and development. That was in 1999. A large percentage of those firms, 30 firms, are Arab firms because they are, the petrochemicals play a lot in this industry. Yet we find that none of those large Arab companies have developed any major R&D capabilities. And in fact, in 1999, total expenditure spent by Arab countries on R&D is not more than $1 billion altogether. So, as I said, this is I'll come to that later to see how it relates to the whole project. Another problem we're facing is HR and brain drain. And again, when in 200 years ago, when the trains were imported into the Arab world, into Egypt and the Arab world, there used to be a large camel and donkey and industry there, and that industry was replaced by a train industry and then by cars, and which means that jobs were lost. People who used to do this industry, jobs were lost. But because the Arab countries did not develop industries to start producing and building trains and machinery, this means that jobs that were lost in the Arab world created work probably in Europe or in states somewhere in developing countries, somewhere outside. And this is happening all the time. I mean, this is not 200 years ago. That's a simple example. But now we see that as computerization, as technology is being imported, and technology we know is replacing a lot of the work that's being done manually. If work is not generated to start getting people to use these new technologies and make use of it, then we will see a shift of the skills of the work that's being lost in the developing countries and more jobs being created outside. So what do we see now? Because of this trend, we see that since developing countries know that this is the trend, we see now everybody here realizes the importance now of training and retraining and education. I mean, in fact, this is where countries are looking for skills now. You go to a country, if a multinational or a big company wants to invest in a country, the first thing they look at is the educational system and the training system. If it's good, they know that there's a good potential to go and work there. So developing countries realize that education is important. This is not being realized by developed countries or OECD realize that developing countries have not caught on to this notion yet. Do not realize how important it is. But even though the developing countries are aware of this fact that training is important, technology is changing very quickly, and we see that it's very costly to keep upgrading the educational system and training and retraining and training, so that even developed countries are falling behind. What's the solution? The OECD zero-cost solution. They go and they get human resources from developing countries. They have people who are trained. You get the sort of best trained people, the most educated, and you basically attract them because for several reasons. I mean, you can pay them better, and the conditions and the work conditions environment for people in developing countries is not it does not attract them to stay there. So they are attracted both by financial and often by scientific requirement to go there. So it's expected that in the coming few years, OECD countries will probably drain 50 to 80% of Arab world IT experts in the coming few years. This is what happened actually in the 70s, 60s and 70s by engineers and doctors in the Arab countries. So there is a problem here, and it's an important problem to keep in mind. The only way third world countries could afford to retain their own human resources is if they establish suitable infrastructure to enable their human resources to contribute to national economic progress. So countries have to do something about that. We cannot just look at people and say, okay, they can go, those who can go, because you really need to stop that drain to keep those people to develop the industries locally. There are new rules of the game. It is innovation and skills are the generations of economic growth. This is where it stands now. We see that the price of gold has been dropping recently. It's been dropping because and metals have been dropping because people realize that this is where you can make money, by being innovative, by creating, by coming up with new ideas. Or the smart kids that come out. This is where the money is. It's no longer in having gold, for example. And then we realize that capabilities in science depend on sophisticated systems sustained by an entire society. And this is important because this is where I started off talking about the Arab world. You know, it's not only, we can't only go and talk about developing IT as IT independently. Here we say, now people are talking about IT. They say, you know, it's becoming a big topic. A lot of countries want to get into IT. They want to develop their IT capacity. They want to do the India experience. But at the same time, they're looking at it independently, you know, as if it's like one industry on its own. And it's important to realize that IT is, you know, it's part of developing. It's part of a mindset. It's part of sciences, the development of sciences, the part of research and development, part of innovation. And all the issues that I addressed initially with regard to research and development and transfer of knowledge are issues that need to be addressed and need to be looked at. We see there are serious initiatives taken by some countries like Jordan and Egypt. Jordan, the king, for example, I mean, this is, I guess, one of the cases when you have a dictator, a monarch, taking the lead, it has an advantage because the king realized, young king decided that it's a good thing to have IT in Jordan, and then he led the initiative, and then he's just forcing everybody to go and all sorts of studies and strategies and enabling environments, etc., etc. So that's very good. At the same time, other places where we have varying levels of enabling environments, other places are talking about it. For example, at least for us, Palestinian Authority, we have a problem with that. You know, they talk about it. Yes, it's good. Yes, we want to do that. Yes, we want to do this. But it's not necessarily moving the way it should be. For example, the PS domain, which Stefano mentioned yesterday, for those who were present, we went ahead and we did a whole public thing, and we finally came up with a policy paper on how the PS domain should be run and who should run it, the naming authority, etc., etc. And all of a sudden, some governmental agency decided, nope, we're going to run it. So, you know, these kind of things slow things down significantly. A problem also that Middle Eastern countries are facing is low quality of IT education. We don't have enough numbers of teachers and trainers. The curriculum is outdated. There's slow pace of responding to rapidly changing technology. There's little or no linkages to industry, and the education system is rigid and there's limited resources. At the same time, we have a small number of IT professionals, of qualified IT professionals, basically just in terms of numbers. And that is, of course, directly related to the educational system. I mean, the education system doesn't create enough numbers, and the quality is not up to an international standard. And also a problem is that the IT sector is not global. Everything, the sector in the Middle Eastern countries was revolving about local markets. And as I said before, not even regional markets, I mean local markets. And as I said before, the Arab world with its own small blocks here and there it's not enough. You need to think bigger, you need to work bigger, you need to work on a global scale. So now we come to international cooperation. There are opportunities in international cooperation, and I don't necessarily have to go into them, and they're pretty obvious. There's training, you can do joint projects like the EU MEDIS initiatives, research and development, you can do teacher-student exchanges, you can get experts from abroad to give advice, there's industry partnerships, access to knowledge, networking, all those issues that can be done, clear opportunities in transfer of knowledge. I would like to concentrate a little bit on the obstacles, because this is where the problems are, and the obstacles is that you don't necessarily have strategic planning, or poor or no strategic planning. So you see somebody in a developing country interested in transfer of knowledge or of getting, but like it's done ad hoc. This is a good idea, so we'll do it this way. Or somebody else comes with another good idea and they'll do it this way. And so this is one of the issues. We have a problem with national decisions being made according to political or personal interests. So somebody who has access to funding or to project funding or in the government decides that, okay, I want to give it to this guy because he's my friend, or because there may be some interest, personal interest here and there in it. So that's a problem. As the non-favorable enabling environments, that's something I mentioned again. The example I gave. You get people, experts from abroad who want to work with you or develop something, and then they run into blocks. They run into people may run into some policies or laws and regulations that will prevent them from moving further into their projects and developing. Individualism, that's a big problem also. Everybody, we face a lot, and it comes in a sense that I as an institution want to do something, and then I decide I want to keep it all to myself, or I don't want to share the experience or expand the network to work with somebody else. So that's a problem. And expatriate expertise, that's very important. As I said, we know, for example, that I go back to the India experience. We know that there are, just statistics. We know that there are approximately, I think 10% actually of employees at Microsoft are Indian. And we know that there are 750 companies, that's I think 1999, in the Silicon Valley that are also run by Indians. So now, just looking at we don't have any statistics on Arabs or Palestinians or Middle Easterns doing this kind of work, but just judging from the statistics, we know, as I said, there's 1.2 billion Indians, 300,000 Arabs, and we know that there's a lot of people from the Arab countries who go and live and have been living and studying and working in the US. So there should be a significant number of Arabs and Middle Easterners living in the West with a lot of IT experience and possibilities. So those are an important resource that they are not being utilized, and it's very important to utilize them because they're an important resource for the country. And this is another major problem. We face this quite frequently, is that since a lot of the countries in the Middle East are receiving donations and funding support for various projects, we find that country X with a specific political agenda is trying to impose this agenda on the projects that they want to support, and that tends to be a problem very often. I just to end this presentation, I just want to talk very quickly about projects that we're doing. I'm talking about, I represent Birzeit University. We're a university located about 20 kilometers north of Jerusalem, and we're not going to solve the problems of the Middle East with our project, but we would like to at least address some of the issues that I spoke about in this presentation. We're trying to do it systematically, and we'll see how it goes. So we're setting up, for example, what we call a center of excellence in IT, and the idea is building a human resource supply infrastructure that will inject the IT sector with highly skilled IT professionals at the industry, education, and policy and decision-making levels. So it's a program, it's a training program that we want to get involved with, but this program works we want to create sort of an IT elite force, or people and some 1 to 200 IT professionals every year, system engineers, analysts, business developers in IT, and those would be just a small number of people that could lead the development of the industry. And the idea in this thing is we would like to part of the mission of this project, or to achieve this, is we would start initially with training, but eventually move into research and development. We would like to set up incubators, a technology park. This will all be related to this project. The next thing would be a center for professional and vocational training, and this center we will try to produce a large number of IT professionals, sort of workers. We would like to initially start with a couple of hundreds, but we'd like to move into a few hundreds, or probably hopefully 1,000 or so every year of graduates. And the last one, which is very important, and this would fall probably within the scope of the first project, is training of high school teachers. I just quickly would like to go to talk about this one, because I think it's important. There are 97% of all students complete grade 10. This is an important figure. I just learned it a few months ago, that most high school kids finish up to grade 10, which is very good. It's given that there's Bedouins and remote villages and things like that. But we know that those people, when you look at the skill set or skill level of the people in the community, we know that there are shortcomings in the knowledge and skills of the high school graduates. And this clearly indicates, and we also know that a long-term strategy, the first two projects I talked about are sort of shorter-term strategy. We want to create a task force, we want to create a force that could start creating some sort of industry. But a long-term strategy, if you really want to make a change, an effective change in creating an IT workforce in Palestine, is to go and work on high school kids. I mean, those are the ones that will make a difference. Those are the ones. This is you work with children, and in 10 years you have really a whole community that's working. And by the way, I mean the children, high school kids, are right now 30% of the Palestinian population is in schools. So and on the one hand, it's very easy. I mean, you do a good job on training those kids. All of a sudden 30% of your population is IT literate. You do a bad job in training, then you have a very huge liability coming up, in a few years in terms of people being uneducated. So it's very important to train high school teachers. I mean, this is where the trick is. You train high school teachers, then the high school teachers will be able to train the kids, and that's how you can develop. And the most important, and this is the last slide, the most important, or the key to success, it's not necessarily IT, it's not necessarily computers. We need to teach, we need to give students an active approach in learning. We want the role of the teacher to change from a distributor of book learning to tutor and guiding students. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of these ideas, but it's something that's important for us to emphasize. We need to emphasize on soft skills like creative thinking, problem solving, language, and teamwork, and issues like that. And finally, those projects are not, they are a national resource, and they promote best practice, pilot projects. And finally, we are looking for partners. If anybody is interested in these projects or would like to work with us on these projects, we're looking for partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marwan. Just a comment. Of course, all your activity and your presentation has been based on the training and on teaching on IT, which is a very important factor. Unfortunately, when you have very good technicians, then if there is not an industry and the possibility of employing these people, then these people easily become expatriates themselves. And also there is the need of trying to bring back the experience of the expatriates, which like a number of Palestinians living outside. So my suggestion is that you do the most you can do in order to join the working group, the community in Europe and other countries, of course. Also by utilizing the network, why not? Because of course we know that there is not for the travels and so on. So, since I had some experience in assisting Palestinians for this project of activating the domain name .yes, I had some direct experience. But I would like to know if someone wants to ask something, some questions to Marwan.
Well, it's quite related to what you were saying about the need for cooperation. I think that one of the weaknesses of many systems, say compared to the Indian system, is the lack of cooperative activity and the excess of isolation. I'm originally from Turkey, and I've witnessed this, and it's still an ongoing phenomenon in Turkey where people say we're going to develop this on our own, that on our own, with insufficient emphasis on the cooperative part. Now, of course, I realize what political situation you are in, what the structures are, and so on. But obviously, your best and worst partners would probably be the Israelis and the Jordanians in a certain sense, because they're also your competitors. But is there some attempt to view your efforts as an integrated effort with Jordan and with Israel? I'm sure that within Israeli universities you'd probably find some people who would be very willing to work with you, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, for obvious reasons, I mean, Israel now is not a potential partner, and I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Jordan and the region, absolutely. I mean, this is the whole idea here. The idea of this project is to start off with at least with a pilot phase within the university, our university. Next phase is start to expand it within the country, and if we develop this infrastructure, this project, the idea, I mean, I didn't get much into the project, but the networking component is definitely one of the major components. I mean, because there's research and development, networking, research, and training. These are the three key components of this project. But yes, I mean, if this develops and this project grows, by all means we would like to do it on a regional basis. And down the road, I mean, yes, we'd like to work with Israel, but not under these circumstances.
Well, actually, I had one comment just to what Marwan said. Now I have a question too about the India thing. I mean, I did spend quite a bit of time. I'm from Israel, by the way, talking to you and explaining to things. So there is a possibility. If you're not interested in listening to what I have to say, then maybe you should just tell me not to talk to you at all. I find it a bit insulting saying it's not a potential partner in any way. The other thing is that India has about 200 million plus middle class, which is not comparable to our world, I think. It's about the same as the US. And it's a good market, and there are also a lot of programmers a lot of companies that do outsourcing for India, and that provides a lot of employment too. I'm not quite sure how you draw the parallel.
I just drew the parallel between India, just sheer numbers, statistics, figures.
Yes.
I didn't, this is just a rough estimate without getting into the...
Statistics are one of the kind of lies, and taking an average between a very poor population, so that 5 or 6 times bigger than the middle class, is comparable in income to Western countries, more or less. It's not a very good measure, in my opinion.
Well, there's a very large middle class in Arab countries. Variable, we look at the, we go to the Gulf states, and if we take Egypt, and so that if we go into also Russia, there's a large middle class in Arab world as well.
Yes, but most of the money would be from probably oil-based industries and not something else, and no real technology. Or maybe I'm mistaken.
This is the point that I was making. One of the reasons, the reason the situation is like that is because the place is fragmented. Had it been less fragmented, had it had more centers, or had it had things to be different.
Other questions? I want to make a final comment about this suggestion of cooperating with the border countries. And personally, I'm a friend of technicians from Palestine. I'm a friend of technicians from Israel, and I can assure that before the present situation, there was from one side the necessity of Palestinians to rely on the telecom infrastructure of Israel, and some of the aspects are still there. But it takes a long time that Palestine is pushing for becoming an independent country, and this creates a lot of problems also for them to establish an infrastructure of the Palestinian cities as possibly independent as possibly to the Israeli infrastructure. So ideally, if you talk with people, they want to cooperate, but in practice, because of the policy, this is almost impossible. And it was like that even 2 or 3 years ago. This is what I experienced. While of course it is maybe much easier to work with Jordan or Egypt or other surrounding countries, although as Marwan said, these Arab countries are quite fragmented politically and also as economical interest.
Perhaps I'd like to just maybe elaborate a little bit on a couple of things. I mean, the fact that we're saying we do not want to cooperate with collaborate with Israel is not. I mean, we're not talking about an issue or a matter of dogma or somebody being hard-headed. I mean, the situation, let me tell you, even the situation before 9 months ago, anybody, like as a university, anybody from the university, if I wanted to go into, or anybody in the university wanted to go meet a counterpart in the Hebrew University, would have had to go and take permission from the Israeli authorities to go into Jerusalem, which is an extremely humiliating thing for anybody to do, given that even somebody was born in Jerusalem. And this permission thing was ongoing even under the best of conditions and under when we were working under peaceful terms. So this kind of and this is just one example of what was going on, and there's one doesn't have to get into this issue. But this kind of thing, I mean, trying to pretend that the situation is normal and try to pretend that we can work together and team up and do projects when little basic issues like this ones are not being addressed. I mean, it's a measure of dignity, to be honest. And now the situation again, I mean, it's no point to get into that. I mean, what we're going through now, I mean, makes it practically impossible to deal with. Anyway, But working with the Arab countries, is definitely an important thing. And I think down the road we're going to discover that we don't have much of a choice. I mean, hopefully we will. Right now it's a matter of competition. Egypt wants to compete with Jordan wants to compete with Palestine, with the UAE. But probably down the road people are going to just realize that they need to start working more closely together. I don't know how long that road would be, but I hope that will happen.